Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second Balwin Sport Marathon Series. Really, really excited to be here and really excited to see it all. Can't see all of you, but you all at home, hopefully watching this. I see there's a couple of people who have already clicked in. Gregory's in East London. He's training for Peninsula Marathon. Kathy's saying that she's in Paul, also doing Peninsula. I know that one's coming up soon. So, yeah, definitely in the right place tonight. And guys, it's a moment just to say thank you to the people who are bringing this webinar series to you. It's a company called Laundromax. I love that. It says run hard, clean easy. I mean, for me anyways, I know that when my training picks up, my laundry becomes even double. So yeah, definitely a good one to have in the book. So yeah, guys, keep some comments coming. If you are watching, let us know where you're from. Let us know which race and distance you're doing, which one of the Balwin Sports Series races you're doing. And then, yeah, we'll definitely get to some questions and all the rest. But let's dive straight into it then. Just to do a couple of introductions, if I can. The person that you see on the screen there is a head coach here at coachperry.com. It's Lindsay Perry. He has a postgraduate degree in sports science. He's known as the official Comrades Marathon coach, so some of you must know him quite well. He's led athletes to the last 4 Olympic Games. And for the past 25 years, he has been coaching amateur and professional athletes to PRs and podiums in some of the world's most prestigious races. He also has a marathon PR of 2:45 and a Comrades best of 7:11, so not too shabby there. So, Linz, hi, how are you doing? Yeah, muted, Linz.
Let's unmute. And yeah, very good. Very excited to share. Looking forward to the next hour. And yeah, my favorite part is the Q&A. So we will try not to bore you too much with the formal stuff. And then you can fire away your questions and we'll get you ready for whichever race it is you've chosen to do in the series.
Brilliant. Thanks, Linz. And then just very briefly on me, I'm not going to go through a whole introduction. I'm just here to manage things and to lead the gents on. They're going to be sharing all the expertise. I'm the head of the female athlete program at coachperry.com. Done a couple of races myself, and so really excited to be here as well. I've got a CSCS qualification, which is strength and conditioning, and an MBA and a sports science degree. A very brief introduction on Mark Wolf as well. Mark is our nutrition expert here today. Mark is an expert in exercise physiology and nutrition with over 25 years of experience dedicated to preventative health. He co-founded 32 GI Sports Nutrition and has a robust background in exercise physiology, human biology, blood chemistry, and strength and conditioning for both endurance and field sports. And Mark is passionate about helping individuals, both professional and amateur athletes, unlock their full potential through a comprehensive focus on health. And his approach emphasizes the critical role of nutrition in recovery, immune system support, metabolic health, emotional stability, stress management, and overall exercise performance. So, Mark, lovely to have you here again with us. We enjoyed last week. Welcome back.
Thanks, Shona. Thanks, Lindsay. Good to be back.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. So Lindsay and Mark and I are going to jump off. Linz, I will hand over to you. And then guys, just keep the questions coming. We will try and get to as many as we can in the Q&A. But yeah, obviously the guys do want to get through their presentations as well. Thanks, Linz.
Right. Yeah, so then let's jump to it. I think I'm going to have to use Murphy's Law. It was working when we tested, but it seems that
let me stop that out. Apologies.
I can't.
A second.
Oh, there we go.
Sorry, let me get you there, Lynn. Sorry about that. I actually put up the wrong one.
That's fine. I'll get it there. All good. Don't worry. Cool. That's it. Teething problems out of the way. So, cool. So what we're going to do, what I'm going to run through, so it's quite a lot, and I've essentially been given 20 minutes to get through it. Yeah, but like I said, I think that's not a bad idea because then we can really jump in some questions. So we're going to talk about how to taper. All the races are happening at different weekends, and there's a variety of distances. So I'm going to try and keep it practical and advice that you can use regardless of which of the 4 races you intend on doing all the distance. Yeah, just talk through race goals and race strategy. Talk a little bit on the difference in the routes and how your approach should therefore change. And then, of course, a lot of you are doing these as standalone races. And so this race is it. And you'll be racing for a PB, and that will change slightly just how much and how aggressively you taper. but there are also a ton of people that are using these races for other races, like Two Oceans and Comrades. And so we'll just talk a little bit about how that fits into the scheme of things in the South African racing calendar. But that is what we'll be looking through. So look, why do we taper? And I think often when I give these talks, explaining to people why we do things is so helpful in getting them to buy in and then do what you need to make the most success out of race day. So why do we taper? Because we need to freshen up. So just like we can't really improve unless we allow ourselves to recover, we also can't get to a peak performance if we don't allow the body to both recover and then go through a super compensation so that it can really let out all that training that we've done, can really bring the spring back in your step, and you can have a performances above what you've done before. So that's literally what we are trying to achieve from the taper. So when do we start this process? Now that is going to depend a little bit on whether you are racing a 5, a 10, 21, or a marathon, and it very definitely is impacted by if this is your main race or not. Okay, so for 5 and 10K races, your taper is going to be very short, 1 to 2 weeks at most. And you're also not really going to drop your volume by much, but you are going to drive up the intensity. And then in the last kind of 3-4 days going into that race, you're really going to let yourself freshen up. So the 5 and 10K, probably a lot simpler. You're probably going to do about 90% of your total training volume with higher intensity in the week before. And that final week, you're probably going to do between 65 and 70% of your normal volume. And then early in the week, do some really a short, hard session, perhaps 2, depending on your level as an athlete. And then you're going to roll into that 5 or 10K race. For a half marathon, that process will be slightly different. So we'll do, in fact, the half and the marathon are similar, other than the fact that our total volume for the marathon is going to be quite high when we get into that final 3 weeks. And you're going to do your longest training run in the half marathon between 3 and 4 weeks before marathon race day. And then 3 weeks out, you're going to drop your mileage to 85% or so of total volume. 1 week out, or 2 weeks out, you're going to drop that to about 70 to 75 of your total running volume. And in the final week, you're going to more or less do half of what you've been doing up to that point. And again, you will increase the intensity, but a lot of people make the mistake of going crazy when they hear coaches saying, okay, we're going to drop the volume and increase the intensity. And they increase that intensity so much that they actually end up at the same training load. And then we don't freshen up as we would like to. So you do drop the volume of your speed workouts. You drop the length of the repetition of those speed workouts, and you just drive the intensity up a little bit harder than race pace, to be honest. And then that allows your legs to really get that bounce and that step. Okay. So yeah, is there a formula? Yeah, I like to work pretty much on that 3 weeks out, 80-85%, 70 to 75%, and then 50% of training volume in that final week. And then what I want to touch on there is coming back to this idea of whether we are using these races for qualifying for something else, as training races for something else, or if we're racing. And what I've just been through is how you will do it if this is your main race and you are going to try and run a PB, or you're really chasing a good seeing for one of the other races that you've got planned in the year. Now, if it's a training race or a stepping stone to a different race, then your taper is going to be a lot shorter. I don't believe in doing any marathon on very tired legs. It's such a South African thing to do that. So in the rest of the world, marathons are awesome. If you do a marathon, people think you're a hero. It's only in South Africa where people think, oh, if we're doing a marathon, then it's a training race for some other race. Okay. But if that is the case, and that is what you're doing, if you're using the 10K to set yourself up for a half marathon later in the series, for example, or you're doing all the races in the series, you're doing all the 10s, or you're doing all the halves, then for each of the races, you will just freshen yourself up over 3 or 4 days by cutting the volume in half and just allowing your body to freshen up a little bit. And then you'll only do your proper taper going into the last 2 weeks before your A race. So look, these races are all pretty close together. Yeah, we've got the first one coming up at Jeppe on the 9th of February. Then we've got the 16th of February, Peninsula, 23rd of February in Pretoria. So they're really, the Balwin Sport Series is hot on each other's heels. And then there's a little bit of a gap, of course, to the Dolphin Coast or Dolphin Striders on the 16th of March. So, yeah, all of that just to kind of give you a little bit of an idea of how to go about the taper. Now, as the biggest individual variation in how to go about the taper is, do I do a session before the race and after the race? Now, I've been coaching for a really long time, and there isn't one that is better than the other. As individuals, we respond to tapering differently. And so the way you make that decision is, should I do a little something before the day before the race, or shouldn't I? Is to actually assess yourself now during the training. How do you feel after a rest day? So some people feel a little bit sluggish immediately after a rest day, and it takes a really good warm up to get them going. And then on day 2, they'll actually only start to feel the benefits of that rest day. So we do recover and we do get fresher, but we feel tight, uncomfortable, sluggish. Okay. So if that's you, then you want to go out the day before and do like a 15 to 20-minute run with 3 to 5 30 to 40-second pickups. Now, those pickups are literally just running at the race pace you intend to run the next day. So they are not flat out. And in fact, because they're so short, 30 to 40 seconds, they often feel a little bit too easy. But that's the point. They're literally just there to give you enough exercise to keep everything firing, feeling loose, and so that you don't feel sluggish, tight, uncomfortable for the first 20 to 30 minutes of your race the next day. Okay. However, if you feel great and you always feel like you got a spring in your step the day after a rest day, then don't do exercise for 1 to 2 days before you go into the race. Okay. Sure, we'll get a couple of questions on tapering later on. So we will get into those in a bit. And technology is not going to be my friend tonight. Now it is there. Let me just do it manually. Fine. I'll use my mouse. All good. Okay, so getting it out right on race day. Really, the single most important thing to do to get your race day right is to be realistic about what your goal is. That means basing that goal in something that you've done. The training, a time trial, I wanted to call them key sessions, but I actually hate that word. But your higher intensity sessions, we can have a look at those and help you guys make those decisions, so that you can then actually line up the on race day confident of being able to achieve your goal. And then you want to plan your race. And to plan your race, you have to have a look and go, right, what route am I running? Now, this goes for 5, for 10, for 21, and the marathon. Okay. It is still very important to plan your race. People who mess their pacing up or their race plan up in a 5K perhaps don't get punished as severely as we go longer. But typically what happens when we get our race plan wrong, and particularly when we ignore it, okay? So you've got to plan your race and then actually race that plan. But people who get ahead of themselves, start too fast, it's typically around that 70%, 2/3 to 70% of the race, boom, and then you start to struggle. So in a 5K, that's typically at 3.5Ks, and you just can't finish the race off. In a 10K, it's around 7 kilometers. In a half marathon, it's around 16, 17 kilometers. And in the marathon, it's kind of at that dreaded between 29 and 33, 34 kilometers that you really start to run into trouble if you haven't really stuck to your guns and run to what you are capable of. So you really do need to plan that. And hopefully when I talk a little bit about the different routes and approaches, that'll help you to set up that race plan and then make sure that you stick to that race plan. Okay, so how do we pace the perfect 5 kilometer? Because that's the one where you're kind of going the most flat out. And world records, when you go through good athletes, their personal bests, provincial records, follow a very typical pattern. Okay. The first kilometer is typically your second fastest kilometer of the 5, and it's a little bit quicker than you should be going, but not wildly so. Kilometer 2 and 3 are then normally bang on the pace that you should be running to achieve the goal that you set out to be. So that's generally, those two are representative of the final average time that you reach. The 4th kilometer is typically the slowest kilometer. And again, if you're running well and if you're on your personal best time or world record pace, let's use that as an example, it's not far off the others. It just so happens that always, it's almost like a psychological thing that one is the slowest. It's kind of when you're starting to struggle mentally. It's kind of like when you almost saving yourself a little bit for the end. You definitely start to get tired. And then the last kilometer, we can almost always pick it up. And when we've paced it just about perfectly and we hit our best performance ever, that is typically the fastest kilometer of the 5. So that's kind of what your pacing looks like. Now, of course, I just said earlier that we've got to take the course profile into account. So get the course profile and then think about what I've just said and do that in terms of effort. So you'll know that your effort in the first kilometer will be ever so much harder than it should be because of the adrenaline from the start. Then you've got to settle down in that next kilometer 2, kilometer 3 to get that even paced, the effort that's going to give you the equivalent of the even pace for your overall target time. You know you're going to battle a little bit effort-wise in the 4th K, and then you're going to give it all in the last K. And then you take that stuff and you plonk it onto the route and go, okay, the hardest kilometer on this course is the 3rd kilometer. So in time, it's going to be slower, but in effort, it's got to be the same effort as kilometer 2. And I've not got to fight too hard against the time because kilometer 4 is downhill. So that's going to, in a way, be slightly under my best effort, but it's going to be my fastest kilometer because that's the downhill kilometer on the course. And that's how you then use the course to figure that out. And that's looking at the profile. Okay. Now, when we go to the longer races, half marathon, marathon, do we approach a race differently when it's point to point, when it's a 1-lapper, when it's a 2-lapper? And the answer is yes. It's not different in that the time outcome or the goal changes, but our approach changes slightly. On a double lapper, we can break a race up into sections quite easily, and we can learn from those sections. So lap 1, we can have an idea of how we should approach, but we can actually learn from how we felt at each section, so that when we hit the 2nd lap, we've got a much better idea of where we can burn some matches, where we should be holding up, where we can ride the course a little bit on the downhills so that we can save a little bit of energy. Maybe a hill on the first lap took way more out of me than I was expecting it to. So on the second lap, I can do some more walk breaks, so that I'm going to lose a bit more time on that hill, but I'm going to get to the top of it much fresher, and I'm going to be able to get back into my stride much quicker when I go along. So your approach will be a bit different when we're doing laps, even though your goal outcome will be very different. A point to point is often the most difficult, because it's very easy on a point to point to get sucked into thinking too far down the road, because all you can see in most of these point to points is you can see a long way in front of you. And to be honest, Peninsula is a good example of that. And it's a bit dark when you start off, but once you hit main road, it's straight and you run straight and you can see very far into the distance. So it's very easy to just be too far ahead in the distance. So you've got to build in little tricks to keep yourself in the here and now, but also to keep your mind occupied. Mark's going to go through nutrition in a bit, but I think in point to points, I often find focusing on my nutrition strategy and kind of focusing on what I'm going to do at the next nutrition point that I've got, how I'm going to get it in, where am I going to get it, what am I going to get. And so I break up my point to point races very much around food, fueling, and eating. And if you do that, it really does just keep you distracted from thinking how far you still got to go, because that's one of the biggest problems in a marathon in particular, is kind of getting lost in the fact that you've still got so many Ks to go. So you want to drag yourself back, and then and the rest of the races are it's Dolphin and Peninsula that are point to point, and of course the two are quite different. So for striders, for the Balwin Sports Dolphin Marathon, what I would do there is really plan your race meticulously with the hills that you've got to go over. It is point to point. It is slightly net downhill, but you have got some climbs to negotiate. And so you really want to have a look at that. Keep yourself in the here and now, but also just know that when you get to point X, you've got a strategy for conserving energy and using energy in the right part of the course. Okay. Right. And then finally, comrades and two oceans. So for me, if you've already qualified, and there are a lot of people that are literally qualifying now. So the 9th of February is a huge qualifying weekend at Balwin Sport Marathon. And then, of course, the biggest entries are at Peninsula. So the same thing, a lot of people coming from altitude to try and run a fast seeding down at sea level on the 16th of February. But if you're using those races to qualify, then we're going to do a proper taper as we've described. We're going to run the race really hard, get our best possible time, and then you're going to recover afterwards. Very important to take time off. Okay. Balwin Sport Pretoria Marathon, one of the toughest marathons on our calendar, but a brilliant preparation race for both Two Oceans and Comrades. So tons of people run that race. Some are to qualify, but a lot of people as part of their rites of passage to training for Comrades. Now, for that, you're not going to do a big taper. You're going to take it nice and easy the week before. You're going to run that race as a long, slow training run, and then you're going to make sure that you take recovery the following week, because it's going to be hot, it's going to be tough. And then, of course, the Balwin Sports Dolphin Marathon, that one, from a timing point of view, should probably be run as a training race rather than a race if you are preparing for a Comrades or Two Oceans. However, it's a beautiful race and it's a great race to do as a standalone race. So if you're racing it, you're going to take that proper taper. But if you are doing Comrades or Two Oceans, and Two Oceans in particular, that'll be like almost an ideal last long training run before you go to Two Oceans. But you'll just drop that training slightly the week before, not much, and then have a very easy week coming out of that. And then you will go and carry on with your Two Oceans. So what can I get out of all these events? All of them are fantastically well organized. Two of them are one of them is very fast if the wind doesn't blow. Jeppy's a fairly quick marathon. So those are two good options for improving your seeding or qualifying for Comrades. And then Pretoria and Dolphins are really great training options for the longer stuff. So I think that is me for this one. So I can see tons of comments. I don't know if those are all questions, but
I think let's ask one question, Alan, before we get Mark on, because I think it's quite a good one. So Karab was asking it, and so is someone else. So let me pop it on screen for you. So Karab was saying, I've been down with flu and shin splints for 2 weeks. My worry is, will I finish Cape Peninsula Marathon? The same thing from Tom was also saying that he's sick, been leading up. What's the best plan to maximize the next 3 weeks?
So, look, guys, really what it depends on there is how much training and how fit you were at the point of getting injured. So the one thing that we know unequivocally is that the worst result you can achieve at a race is by starting a race sick, and in particular starting a race injured. Okay, so those are not really an option, and so you've got to get that injury sorted out. And look, the flu is slightly different. You're going to get over that. You will be healthy by the 16th of February, unless you've got something horribly serious. So I'm not too worried about the illness. A couple of days missed there, that's not going to derail your training. Making sure that when you come back from illness, that you don't go straight into full volume training and almost reverse taper. So start with a couple of gentle runs and gradually increase the volume, and then only bring in the intensity 7 to 10 days after you've had your last symptom. So that's how you'll return from that. The injury is a different story. It really depends on how badly injured you are. But the most important things in terms of your ability to finish the Balwin Sport Peninsula Marathon or not is really where you are at this point in time. So if your training has gone really well up to this point in time, you've missed 2 weeks, and now you're coming out of the woods and your injury is just about a thing of the past, then you've got another 10 days now where you can train well, but not too hard. So you're going to do a couple of 8 to 12 runs every 2 to 3 days. And that'll then at least help you to maintain your fitness where you are now without building too much fatigue, and without re-irritating those shins. And that'll give you a good chance of finishing on the 16th of February.
Awesome. Brilliant. Thank you, Linz. Going to put you on the side for now. We're just going to say thanks. Yeah, thanks for that. We will definitely get to more questions in just a little bit. Guys, just if you missed this in the beginning, just want to say a massive, massive thank you to Laundromax again for really sponsoring and bringing us this Balwin Sport webinar series. So really, really thank you to them. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm in a massive block of training now as well, and the laundry just keeps piling up. All right, so definitely a match well made. And then of course to Balwin Sport. So yeah, just want to put a video up for them just to say thank you. What a great series that they're putting together. I think it's really awesome to have these races in and around the entire country. So let's just give them a second as well before we bring Mark.
This is Africa.
Balwin Properties takes greening and sustainability to its absolute limit. With totally carbon neutral green barn lifestyle centers that through recycling, gardening, clever building and ridiculous commitment have zero negative effect on the environment.
We are looking to make our developments greener. We're doing really cutting edge stuff. I'm really excited to be part of it.
Steve has been voted onto the board of the Green Building Council of South Africa, a prestigious honor reserved for those who prioritize our planet's health above all else.
This is the fourth 6-star lifestyle achievement by Balwin, and it's amazing to see Balwin making a change, a positive change in the climate.
And on behalf of the GBC, I'm delighted to be here today to award this highest rating of 6-star to Balwin Head Office.
We believe in this planet, we believe in South Africa, and yes, we're not going to Australia, we're staying right here. We love this country. This is the future. Balwin is going totally green. We have our electric car stations, great for energy. This is the new world we live in. Balwin want to be the highest green rated developer in the world. We want to be the best of the best in green. We have a full commitment to green. We're extremely proud and continuing with the greening of our business.
By meeting the strictest building standards, we are keeping our carbon footprint low and interest rates even lower. Balwin has partnered with the major banks to give homeowners incredible interest rate cuts for supporting sustainable building practices.
We've got one world, and if we all start thinking about it, we can improve it. But the most important thing in life is, what do you leave as a legacy? And as you go through your journey of life, it starts becoming very, very important. I want to be known as a property developer that left something on this earth and made it a better place.
All right. Thank you so much, Balwin and Balwin Sport for bringing the series. Let me bring Mark on because this is a really, really important aspect of what we need to do for race day. So, Mark, yes, thank you so much, guys. There's some great questions coming. Keep them coming. We will try and answer as many as we can in the Q&A. But yeah, let me hand over to Mark now to take us through our nutrition strategy for race day. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Shona. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, you are 100% good to go. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Okay, so last week we talked about nutrition around exercise and actually, basic sports nutrition in and around your training. But now as we head towards race day, the nutrition approach needs to be slightly different. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to do a little bit of a recap. So the recap, last week we spoke about fueling requirements based on intensity and duration. And obviously, from the kind of race that you're going to be doing, which is how long it's going to take you to participate in that race, whatever that distance is, that's your duration. What kind of level of intensity are you going to be performing at? That's number one. And the second thing is, what will the energy system be utilizing under those racing conditions? And if you remember last week when I brought up the different kinds of levels of intensity, and I utilized heart rate zones to define those levels of intensity. There's many ways of doing it, but the heart doesn't lie. Where will you mainly be performing when it comes to racing? So obviously in training, you get your zone 1, which is your recovery zone, zone 2, aerobic, and then as you move through the glycolytic zone, zone 3 upwards into what we call above threshold anaerobic zone, being zone 5, these are the different zones that you'd be training in. But when it comes to racing, it's a different ballgame, because when it comes to racing, we've got what I call a comfort zone, which is actually this sort of zone 2 area. And if you're able to run a marathon in this zone, well, then I don't think you're going to be performing at your wanting to get a PB, etc. I don't think you won't be able to hold this zone either due to cardiac drift and just to naturally elevated heart rate over a period of time, excessive fluid loss, temperature changes. The zones that you'll primarily form into when you're racing is what I call, and this is the primary zone, is glycolytic, which is actually your zone 3 and zone 4. And those are the primary performance zones that you'll see. You'll notice at the bottom there, I've also put in zone 5, I've put a death trap. If you're going to run a marathon and you hit that zone, chances are that's your death trap, and that's going to actually ultimately fatigue you. I'm not going to deal too much into the physiology around the training because I'm sure Lindsay can talk about that. But I need to talk about the fueling in these primary zones that you're going to be running in when you hit your event. Okay. Remember, I spoke about the different fuel tanks last week. Glycogen being a fuel tank that's approximately 2,000 calories, and then the fat tank being around 40,000 calories. And these tanks are utilized under different conditions. When you are in a glycolytic zone, you will tap into your glycogen tank and you'll burn off quite a large amount. And if you look at zone 2, very little glycogen chewed, mainly you utilizing fat as a source of fuel. But once you move into this zone 3 and 4 over here, which is glycolytic, which is primarily going to be the intensity of your race, you are absolutely going to be chewing up glycogen. Okay. And what does it mean when you're chewing up glycogen? It means you need to spare as much glycogen as possible, because really that is part and parcel of your rocket fuel. And as you're moving through these zones, you'll notice that your carbohydrate intake needs to be on the higher side. You definitely cannot do a race like, these distances fasted. You need to fuel the races properly, and you need to take in a significant amount of carbohydrates to support those level of efforts. And you can actually see with this infographic that I put up here, as you move into these higher zones, your glycogen tank has a much higher risk of being depleted. And the only way to spare that glycogen and to stabilize your blood sugar and to keep yourself going would be to take in a higher carbohydrate intake. Okay. So you need to fuel for effort, and that's really what that recap is about. So if we go back to fueling strategies, and I pulled up this chart last week just to explain to you the different types of carbohydrates. I've taken that aerobic and that primary zone, and I've just shown you over here where that would basically fall from the kind of carbohydrate volume you should be consuming while you are participating in a race. And you'll notice here on the left-hand side, and these are 2 hours and less, you're talking around 30 grams per hour. If you are going to be running a marathon or a half marathon, I can tell you now that 30 grams per hour is not a significant amount of fuel. So I actually negate that completely. And what we do is we look at the standard sports nutrition guidelines, which would take us from 60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour. And that would be what I would say be your primary feed in the zone like this, specifically for a endurance race, such as a marathon and even half a marathon. So this is going to be your primary fuel zone. Last week, I did explain to you the importance of testing and training the nutrition during exercise. I think it's important to train the gut. It's not something that you can pick and decide on, I'm going to do this on race day, but you've never tried and tested it before, because each individual's got a tipping point. And based on the kind of product that you're going to be utilizing, the blend of carbohydrates, the absorption rates of those carbohydrates, the ability to allow maximum feed in what I call the fructose and glucose channels in the human body, which provide energy to the energy system when those carbohydrates break down, you need to make sure that your unique digestive system is able to take in that, process it, and utilize it for what you need. And in many cases, a lot of athletes get to race day and they completely fail around their nutrition because they haven't trained their gut, they haven't adapted their gut to take on the required nutrition on race day that they're actually planning for. And that's why I say this process is not, you train for marathon, you don't train 6 to 8 weeks before marathon. A marathon, you want to give yourself maybe 4 to 6 months at least, before a race, and build up properly to it. And if you are training, some people take even longer, but if you are training towards a marathon, you're conditioning your muscles, you need to condition your digestive system to be able to take in the appropriate nutrition on that day. There should be no surprises on the day, because you need to bank your nutrition strategy and your plan during training, and then you need to take that with you to race day. Okay. Somebody said to me this last week, if I work out how many grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight I should be taking in, it's not exactly a number cast in stone. But if you can get a gram of carb per kilogram of body weight, I mean, for an average person, that would actually be brilliant. But the problem is that when you get people going up to 80 to 100 kilograms in weight and you're trying to consume that volume of carbohydrates, it wouldn't be as easy to consume. there's a saying, you can take as much carbohydrates and shove them into your mouth as you want, but it's not up to what you're able to put into your mouth. It's what your digestive system is actually capable of breaking down, absorbing, and utilizing. And that really does come down to testing it properly and making sure that it will work on race day. Okay, just to touch on this again, I did mention that not all products have a combination of carbohydrates in a mix that is 100% suited to taking on large volumes of carbohydrates, say 90 grams or more. A lot of people say to me, I eat dates, I'm only going to take dates. But I can tell you now, if you're trying to consume 90 grams of carbohydrates in the form of dates, chances are you'll end up with GI distress, which is gastrointestinal distress, because the fructose content is extremely high, and the absorption rate of fructose in the fructose channel of the body is limited to a certain amount. And you would want to try and get a correct or appropriate ratio of glucose and fructose, whatever stage releasing carbohydrates are there, and make sure that it does work in your favor from an absorption point of view. And there are many brands out there which will push a fueling strategy of take a gel every 15 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And that's not how fueling works. Fueling works on the amount or the volume of carbohydrates you need to consume on an hourly basis for your unique needs, whatever you're utilizing, whether it's a gel, whether it's chews, whether it's bars, whatever it is, and breaking that down into 30-minute feeds or 20 to 30-minute feeds, and continuing to do that and clock feeding over a period of time. So just make sure whatever you are utilizing is going to be able to provide you with the volume of carbohydrate intake that you need for your fueling strategy. Okay. This is a question I get asked quite a bit. Can I fuel with protein? And the answer is that protein is not an efficient fuel source when it comes to exercise. And the reason being is that if you look at macronutrients being broken down, carbohydrates are quite easily converted to energy, the quickest broken down and accessible from an energy perspective. And protein, the digestive system has to work really hard to break down protein. The digestive system actually expends the most amount of energy when it comes to breaking down protein. So much so that protein probably is only broken down at rates of about 9 to 12 grams on an hourly basis. So even if you look at the maximum, so if I've often been asked at an expo, can I take a protein bar as a source of fuel? The answer is not really, not if it contains 15 or 20 grams of protein, because you're going to put a heavy stress on top of the digestive system. It's not going to work. So if you do have a carbohydrate protein mix, it's better to make sure that the protein portion is not going to be maxing out what your body's capable of breaking down on an hourly basis. So does protein have a benefit? We have seen that it does help satiate and stabilize the blood sugar response when you're consuming it in conjunction with carbohydrates. And there is also, when it comes to long endurance events over a period of time, we find that some athletes that do consume carbohydrates, not those that are maybe going 2.5 hours, but those that are going the 3 to 4 hours or longer, we find that the protein ingestion does actually help with the mitigation of symptoms from gluconeogenesis, which is basically utilizing protein as a fuel substrate, and it can actually allow you to feel a little bit more comfortable over a period of time. But I wouldn't overdo it. And this is something important to take note of. Carbohydrates are the king of fuel, and you do need to make sure that you're taking a sufficient amount of carbs on an hourly basis. Let's look at how to approach the race week. Okay, and we're talking about a week before race day. Very often, as you're tapering, your volume of training is dropping, and so your calorie burn rate is a lot less than what it was before. But many athletes they actually carry on eating the same amount of calories that they were prior to starting the taper process. And this can be a bad mistake, because if you start eating in a calorie surplus going into a taper, because the volume is reduced, you're burning off less calories, but if you're eating more calories, you're eating in a calorie surplus, you do have a risk of landing up gaining weight as you get closer to race day. And it's not something that you want to do. You've been training on a certain frame. You want to get to race day at that same frame weight, and you don't want to land up putting on extra weight. So you need to obviously lower your caloric intake according to your lowered calorie expenditure on a daily basis. And that is something that's quite important. Keep it clean. Obviously, things like, cutting out the junk food, eating more whole foods. I would reduce or cut alcohol. There's no benefit to it at all. The opposite, it hampers such things as muscle protein synthesis, recovery, etc., impacts sleep. So I wouldn't consume alcohol at all. I would expel it from my diet for that period of time. And then also, as far as hydration goes, make sure that you're hydrating constantly on a day-to-day basis, and definitely focus on getting sleep, because sleep equals recovery. And as Lindsay mentioned early on, the goal of a taper is to really freshen you up for race day and make sure that you're 100% recovered when it comes to the race. And sleep, definitely, good sleep actually aids the recovery process. Okay. When we look at closer to race day, 24 to 72 hours beforehand, again, keep it clean. Reduce fiber intake. So the reason we recommend reducing fiber intake is purely based on the fact that fiber is, first of all, not something that's going to provide anything towards the energy system. It's basically there for gut health, but excessive fiber intake can cause gastrointestinal distress, and it is sometimes, with pre-race nerves, aggravates the digestive system a little bit more. And so reduction of fiber intake, we've seen, is way better from an energy perspective, and also reducing the risk of GI distress as the race comes into play. So it's probably a lot better to just, you would know if you're sort of fiber intolerant or not. And if you're not sure, then just reduce it anyway slightly leading into the event. It can only benefit you. Avoid any foods that you're intolerant to. And I can tell you stories where I know athletes that are lactose intolerant, and they've consumed lactose, like dairy, they've taken in the hours or days leading into the event, and they've caused stomach issues. Don't consume a food that you're intolerant to. Stick to foods that work for you. Stick to foods that make you feel comfortable all the time, and stick to foods that allow you to just function normally on a day-to-day basis without providing any kind of gut irritation. Again, no alcohol. You can slightly up your carbohydrate intake. I'll touch on carb loading a little bit. And then hydration, I do believe in, and I'm a fan of mineral loading. So you could take on an electrolyte solution. I mean, we've got the 32 GI hydrate, but whatever electrolyte solution you want, or adding a bit of salt to your water. But it is nice to increase your sodium intake a little bit leading into the event, and try and maintain a very high level of hydration. It can benefit you on the day, and you want to start your race properly hydrated. When it comes to carb loading, I think the important thing to understand is that carb loading is not something that you play with. Carb loading is a science, in actual fact, and there's different methodologies of carb loading. When it comes to elite athletes, you'll find that sometimes they actually deplete their glycogen stores completely in the days leading up to the event, and then they actually top up their carbohydrate levels quite significantly to top up their glycogen stores, so they've got that little bit extra. I think for most athletes out there, unless you're really performing on the stage for a podium and you're an elite athlete, for most athletes out there, I don't think you should look at carb loading extensively and overdoing it, because, to be quite honest, it's not the difference between a loss and a win for you. It's a difference between, I just want to get to the finish line with a smile on my face, or have a good result. And if you get your carb loading incorrect, it's going to end up hurting you. So what I do recommend from carbohydrate intake is you can drop your fat intake slightly. Remember, a gram of fat is 9 calories as opposed to a gram of carb, which is 4 calories. If you're going to maintain a calorie balance through the week, which is what you should be doing as you head towards race day, you shouldn't be in a deficit and you shouldn't be in a surplus. You should be in a maintenance phase. So for every gram of fat you drop in your nutrition intake on a daily basis, you can actually increase your carbs by about 2 grams. And that will be fat coming down, carbohydrates coming up slightly, and that's absolutely fine. Okay, so you can do that just to switch it around and to try and provide a little bit more carbohydrates to the energy system, but not overdo it. And then again, you still need to focus on sleep. 24 hours before the event, so this is looking at the day before. If the race is on a Sunday, I always advocate getting to bed early on the Friday and getting a good night's sleep, because I think the night before the race, everybody's got pre-race nerves and it lands up hurting you. But when it comes to nutrition with pre-race nerves, I think there's a couple of things we need to focus on. First of all, alcohol is absolutely going to impact your sleep, no matter how small it is. No matter how small that amount of alcohol you take in, there is no ways you will get a quality sleep the night before the event. So I would say, please avoid it until afterwards. Alcohol free if you want. No overeating again. You don't want to overload your digestive system. It's very important that you keep your eating stock standard and don't overdo it. You can carry on hydrating properly and mineral loading. I don't believe in having a massive carb meal the night before the event, and I'll explain to you why. But I think that you could increase your carbohydrate intake at lunchtime or have a later afternoon meal, and there you can up your carb intake a significant amount. At dinner, I always advocate a slightly smaller meal than most people have. I don't think that you need to have a massive meal at dinner time, because from the time you consume a large meal to the time you go to sleep, the biggest problem is that if you've overloaded your digestive system, if you've eaten too much, and I've seen this, guys eating bowls of pasta and bowls of rice and crazy things the night before a race, what happens is that they lie in bed and they've elevated the metabolic rates and they're sitting there and with the pre-race nerves and their minds very active and thinking about the next day, which is race day, they actually battle to fall asleep. And the only way you actually induce sleep is that your metabolism comes nicely down, you relax, your digestive system is not functioning at a massive rate. And if you have a large meal before you go to sleep, you are going to battle. It's going to impact your ability to fall asleep quite quickly. And like I say, I think sleep is very important. So if you're going to have a larger meal, keep it way away from bedtime and don't eat it too close to bedtime. You don't have to worry about what you eat the night before, because the next slide that I'm getting to, which is race day, is actually the most important meal of the day. Okay, so when it comes to race day, you need to have a pre-race meal, whatever that pre-race meal is. That pre-race meal needs to be high in carbohydrates, needs to be low in fiber. You should make it also low in fat, and you should have a little bit of protein with it as well, because it does provide some stability, but not an excessive amount. But that pre-race meal is going to set your energy system up for race day. I know a lot of people that skip meals on race day, or skip even meals if they're doing quality training sessions. It's the biggest mistake you can make, because right now, this is where what you consume is going to be giving you the energy, at least for that first part of the race, and then you're obviously going to be topping up in the race as well. Do not skip your pre-race meal. Simple meals I can recommend are things like banana on white bread, if you want. You can even throw some Nutella, honey, and peanut butter on there for all I care. For those that like oats or some sort of a porridge, it's also fine. We've got an instant pre-race meal, which actually also works very well. It's actually a white rice flour. You could have white rice even, overcooked white rice. You could add some honey and cinnamon and a little bit of peanut butter to it, and even throw some banana in. I'm just giving you some simple examples of pre-race meals, and those meals should be consumed about 2 to 2.5 hours at least before the start of a race. The further you are away from the start of the race, the bigger in calories that meal can be. The closer you get to the race, the smaller it needs to be, because you do have to allow for the body to break down and process what you've eaten so that it actually will set you up for that race. Okay. Pre-race hydration, I do believe in taking on some fluid before the race. You can mineral load again. You can take in a hydration solution. One of the things you've got to just ask yourself as well is, have I got a weak bladder? And if so, you shouldn't overload on fluid, because that's going to make you run to a portaloo all the time, and you just don't want to land up in a situation where your bladder is overloaded. So you can drink a little bit of fluid, little bit by little bit, and sip on it, and you don't have to overdo it. There are some people that can take in a lot more fluid, but take in what is conducive to allowing you that level of comfort and not going to overload you at all. And then caffeine. I often get asked, does caffeine play a benefit? Yes, it certainly does, but it's not something you can try on race day. It's something you need to try and test during training to see, are you caffeine tolerant or are you caffeine intolerant? There are some athletes that have got very sensitive digestive systems to caffeine, and it doesn't work for them. But if it does work for you, it can be a great tool to help you with your run. Ingesting caffeine prior to an event, and that would be like 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, can actually set up your energy system quite nicely. It helps free up what we call FFAs, or free fatty acids, and that provides a nice bit of fuel for the energy system. And then during the race, if you want to take on caffeine, I think it actually works very, very well. It does help with lowering the RP, which is the rate of perceived effort. So it gives you the sort of sense of euphoria and allows you to perform at a pace which feels a little bit more comfortable. But the one thing about caffeine you do need to understand if you take it during a race is that it has a peak concentration level of around, it hits peak concentration levels at 60 minutes, and then it starts the downer. Okay. So if you start taking caffeine in a race, you need to keep taking caffeine within an hour, because you need to keep topping it up, because you are going to get these sort of peaks and these drops. So if you've got a caffeine shot, or you want to take on caffeine, and you know that you've only got like one bit of caffeine to take, make sure that you take it at least within 60 minutes of the finish line, so that you get to the finish line if you take it. If you've got like maybe more than one shot, maybe you've got 2 or 3 shots, then you can take it maybe 2 hours or 3 hours before you get to the finish line, and you've got to take it in under an hour, so that you keep topping up your caffeine level. So that's very important. Okay, so just remember on caffeine, but try it in training. Don't try it on race day. Okay, never arrive at race day without a nutrition plan. You need to bed this down way before. I don't know how long you have got before your particular race, but if you don't have a nutrition plan, you better start planning, and you better start trying to test it in some long runs or some quality runs. And remember what I said, you take your volume of carbohydrates per an hour, whether it's 60 grams or 90 grams, you break that down into 30-minute feeds. So that would be like 30 grams every 30 minutes. And you need to start taking that even before the start of the race. I'd say start taking your carbohydrates around 10 minutes before the race, or 15 minutes before. Once the gun goes and you start the race, get comfortable, get into the run, and then start taking it from 20 minutes in again, 15, 20 minutes in, start the feed, and you just keep clock feeding the whole way through. Never leave your feeds for too long, because ultimately that will leave you in the last 5 or 6 Ks of the marathon feeling, what just happened to my body? I've got no gas left to get to the finish line. And very often when you've got no gas left to the finish line, you might not be undertrained, you might be very well trained, but you haven't given your body enough energy to be able to take you to the finish on the pace that you wanted. So that's why a lot of people end up walking, they feed too late, and it's too late. And unfortunately, there's no ways you can go back. When it comes to understanding what your body can achieve on an hourly basis, remember you need to test that during training. And I did put in last week, I'm sure there's still a link on the site, but there's a link to last week's webinar, and there you would start low and build up high, and incrementally build up your carbohydrate intake over time, and keep testing it to see what that tipping point is. And always take notice of your energy levels before, during, and after a session. If you finish a training session strong, it means you probably feel very, very well. So make sure you test it, and then make sure that once you're satisfied with your strategy, you test it out on some long training runs and some good quality runs, and make sure that it works for you, and then take it to race day. But always stick to the plan. Don't deviate from the plan. You've got to make sure that what you utilize during training, you take with you to race day, and you stick to it. Don't change it. I've seen many athletes make changes on race day. They suddenly become unconfident because they're feeding something en route, and they grab something off route, or they do something different, and that sets them up for a hellish ride to the finish. So make sure that you are properly planned from a nutrition strategy. And I think a lot of questions will come through now, so I'm going to finish that, and I'll hand it back over to you, Shana.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Mark. Always so many nuggets in there, guys. So much really, really good information coming through. Lindsay, I'm sure we'll also come back in a second. I'll get him back on for a Q&A. Guys, keep some questions coming, please, if you can. There were a couple that came through. So, Mark, just the first one that did come through, I've got Lindsay back here as well. I know you went into quite a bit of detail on this last week. So tonight, please go back and look at the webinar from last week. But maybe just briefly, Mark, I mean, you did mention some of the fuels that people can use. Is honey a good fuel source for the training and for race day?
Look, honey can make a good fuel source. I think that you've got to just understand that if you're looking from a glucose to fructose ratio, you need to make sure that the volume of honey that you're consuming would be conducive to taking in a large amount. I think honey is limited to, with most athletes that I've worked with from a nutrition point of view, the limit of honey, I would say, is anywhere between 55 to 70 grams of total carbohydrate intake. And after that, you'll probably pick up some GI distress. So again, you've got to try it and test it. I think if you're going to go to that 80, 90, 100, 120, where all these elites are starting to move, then honey is not going to work for you. Then you need to look at something that's designed and the composition is conducive to allowing that maximum amount of carbohydrate intake.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much for that, Mark. Excellent. Thank you, Tanay. Go back and have a look at last week's webinar because Mark went into a lot of detail on that sort of stuff. So this next question comes up often, and I know I asked it last week. I know Dev gave an answer, but it always comes up. So Linz, maybe if you can start, and then Mark, your 2 cents here as well, please, because it always does include nutrition. But yeah, Denise says, I'm 62 years old, running my 6th peninsula. Somehow always get cramps the last 6 to 8 Ks. Any advice, please? She's aiming at a 4:15 finish.
Yeah, so look, I would say that Mark's last little bit of his talk where he was talking about running out of fuel in the last 5 to 6 Ks, it's super common in a marathon. So yeah, I really do feel like cramping is effectively multi-causal, and there's a strong nutritional component to it, both from an energy point of view, but as well as from an electrolyte point of view. And then, of course, the fatigue model. So we had a deep dive into strength training last week. If you're always suffering from cramp towards the end of marathons, strength training will make a big difference. Your race strategy and implementing a walk-run race strategy so that you can have a little bit of a sparing effect on your legs, and you can change the firing frequency of the muscles for those contractions. That'll go a long way to helping reduce that instance of cramping. Yeah, and then I'll again just let Mark talk a little bit about the specifics there, but it will have a strong nutritional component that will also help you. And really, cramping is so debilitating that even if all these things we're suggesting make enough of a change that you push that cramping out to the last 2 kilometers of the race, then there's already a huge improvement.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Your side?
Yeah, I think Lindsay nailed it. I would have said strength is so very vital for that. So absolutely, strength is the bricks and mortar, but that's because of where it's happening. I think also, yeah, and also based on the age of the individual. So, but I think what's quite important is that cramping is a very difficult thing to assess because some people are genetically susceptible to cramps. I think we find that with some runners, they just can't get away from it. And like Lindsay said, it is multifaceted. It could be a combination of strength and it could be hydration and energy related. If you're doing all those things, then there's not much more you can possibly do. But I would say that from a nutrition point of view, obviously energy is something that is so important. I mean, I've seen runners that they run 42 Ks for 5 hours. There's probably one on here that I know very well. He had 2 nougat bars, and I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, man, 50 grams of carbs over 5 hours, it's just not gonna do it. It's not gonna do it. If you look at an elite athlete like Kipchoge, I mean, the guy's consuming like 100 grams of carbs at a weight of 50 something kilograms on an hourly basis. I mean, you're talking about, if I race, I take 115 grams of carbs an hour and I weigh 67. It's just, you've got to take in, the more carbs you can get in, that's going to provide gastrointestinal comfort and you're not going to suffer from any GI distress, the better your energy system is going to feel. When it comes to hydration, very often I find in longer distance races, this can be quite a common cause of cramping, which is dehydration, excessive fluid loss, excessive mineral loss. Sweat is hypertonic, so you are going to lose more fluid than you do minerals. But the problem is that you do need a balance of sodium and fluid in order to be able to make sure that equilibrium is maintained from a hydration perspective. And so some athletes will only drink water when they're en route. It's not a good idea, because then what happens is that if you think about when you drink, and I explained this in a video the other day, you've got what we call intracellular and extracellular fluid. And when you drink anything, a cell wall that basically separates the two is actually permeable, but it's also non-permeable. In other words, what goes into the cell is not necessarily going to be allowed to be going extracellular, and it's not going to be allowed to hydrate you properly. You sometimes you have to have a balance of salt and fluid to be able to create a pressure that's conducive enough to pulling it through and making it extracellular. So in order to do that, you do need something like a hypertonic solution, something that's got sodium in it, along with carbohydrates and water. You'll get a much better pull through when it comes to hydration. So as long as you're taking in salt and you're taking in carbs and you're drinking a sufficient amount of water with that combination, I think the pull through would be quite good. But I would say that if you are cramping quite significantly, you should actually look at maybe slightly increasing your sodium intake along with water. I think as you age, your fluid loss actually, we've seen with people aging, the fluid loss becomes even more excessive as you age. A lot of people as they age also have got a much higher sodium intake in their diets. They're taking a lot more salt. And when you're taking a lot more salt in your daily diet, you're going to excrete a lot more salt when you sweat as well. There's definitely some research studies that have shown the correlation between daily diet and excessive salt loss when it comes to sweating. And I think it's just important to play around with that salt and fluid intake. And if you get that right, and that needs to be measured, you might be taking in 300, 400, 500, up to 1,000 milligrams of sodium per hour, but you'd want to incrementally test it over time during training and see what works for you on long runs to allow you to feel comfortable and good and to try and mitigate that cramping. The last thing I want to mention on this topic is that if you do cramp, I mean, obviously you can't run through it. You probably have to walk it off, etc. The only way you can try and stop the cramping if it does occur is to actually take on fluid, but not on water on its own, to actually try and ingest some minerals with it, specifically salt. So if you've got salt tablets or you've got table salt or whatever you can en route with the water. And in some cases, it can be a neuromuscular trigger, but there's no silver bullet here, like I said in the last webinar. Some people drink pickle juice. Some people take a capsicum anum like we've got, which is like a hot chili. They try and trigger a neuromuscular response, which can stop the cramping. But if the cramping is caused by excessive fluid loss, that trigger will stop it temporarily. But when you start running again, those cramps are just going to start up again quite quickly. So you need to try and stop the cause and not try and just treat the symptoms. And that's really comes down to conditioning and proper prep from a hydration perspective, I would say.
Awesome. Thank you. That's so comprehensive. Thanks, Mark, for that. Linz, for you, particularly for Peninsula, please. Fahima. Hi, Fahima. Nice to hear your name again. It's been a while. Fahima saying, I've heard Cape Townians say, and you mentioned the Southeasterlands as well. If it's a bad Southeaster on the day, it can throw off time. How do you deal with that if that does happen on race day?
So if you're winning, if you're in front, not much. You take it on the chin and do the best that you can. But luckily, there aren't too many of us on this call that are going for the overall win, and so you tuck in behind runners that are bigger than you. And I've very successfully in running used similar tactics to cycling, where we run in groups and we just take turns taking the brunt of the wind. So that's going to be your best defense here, because it's point to point. So, in other races, let me not mention specific races here, but in other races that are more circular, I always tell people not to fight the wind, because the wind will win. So you've got to try and relax and focus on effort. And then, when the wind or the course turns and the wind is at your back, you then make hay while the sun shines. Now, unfortunately, at Peninsula, that's not really an option, but the principle still applies. If you find yourself isolated on your own and fighting the wind, you've got to focus on your effort rather than pace, because if you or you push too hard and try to override the wind will win. And you'll end up having a horrible, horrible run. But fortunately for most of us, there is the option of tucking in behind bigger runners. There is the option to chatting to a couple of runners and saying, hey guys, let's form a pod of 7, 8, 9 runners, and we'll pop 3 or 4 on the front. And the rest of us will tuck behind and we'll swap out every half a K to a K, depending on how strong the wind is blowing. And I remember one particular year where I ran a very fast marathon in Port Elizabeth. And I just happened to have one guy. There were 2 of us. And I was like, right, dude, we're doing half a K at a time. And we literally just swapped half an hour, and half an hour, 500 meters, 500 meters. And we ran like 13 or 14 kilometers like that. And that was just enough of a break to allow us to keep the pace up, because I was getting a rest and then having to work a bit harder than I'd like, and then going easier than I'd like. So, yeah, I mean, that's really the only tactic you've got at your disposal, that or slowing down.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks, Linz. This one, I know Mark has answered, but Linz, I'm going to ask you this first, because there's definitely a pacing element here as well. So Johnny's saying, what do I have to do to not hit the wall at 30 Ks? I'm assuming that's at Peninsula. No matter how much I carb load or hydrate, take on sufficient electrolytes, I always run out of steam at 30 K. So yeah, if you can do that from a running perspective, Mark, and then if you can just reiterate from your side as well, please.
So look, again, without knowing about your actual training, that would literally come down to race planning and are you training for the appropriate goal? And if some of your performances over 5 and 10 and 21 are pointing to the time that you're trying to run and that you are pacing yourself appropriately for that particular pace, and then you are still blowing up at 30 Ks, then we've got to look at your training. Then we've got to figure out what you're doing wrong in your training that's not giving you the endurance to be able to translate your short-term performance into your longer-term goals. But in my experience, it's almost always a lack of understanding of what is required from a pacing point of view. So your best marathon is going to come from being somewhere between a 1.5 minute negative split to about just over 1 minute positive split. So what does that mean? It means that your first half and your second half are going to be very close to each other. Whereas most people run the first half of any race a lot faster than they run the second half of the race. So if your target is 4 hours, that means that you want to get to that halfway mark somewhere around 1:58:30 and 2:01. That's your window to go through halfway. And if you're going through much faster than that, the kind of rule of thumb, or what my dad and his mates used to say, and it kind of holds true, is that for every minute that you are too fast in the first half of a marathon, you're going to lose 4 minutes in the second half of a marathon. So if you're going for a 4 hour and you go through in 1:56, you're going to lose 16 minutes in the second half and you're going to come home in 4:15, just to give you an idea of how that works. So it's almost always pacing, but if the goal is appropriate and you are pacing right and you're blowing up, then it's going to be nutrition or training. Yeah, and then the last thing I do just want to say there is that obviously that pacing strategy assumes an equal first half and second half. So if you're running a race that's very tough in the first half or very tough in the second half, you have to readjust your goal and then build your goal around that particular course.
Thanks. Yeah. Mark, just a reiteration on your side for that, please. Just check if your mic is off there for me.
Yeah, you muted there, Mark.
Sorry, man.
No worries.
I think what Lindsay said is, look, I don't know much about the runner. I would need to look at the weight of the runner, size of the runner, and then try and understand, I guess, training and racing pacing, because that's going to affect the nutrition. So there's this thing about train low, race high. And I'm like, well, if you don't train high ever and you're not fueling accordingly, then how are you going to know what your body can actually take on during training and then take it onto race day? So even though you are maybe carbo loading and hydrating sufficiently, are you clock feeding and taking in the exact amount of carbohydrates required for your level of performance on an hourly basis? If I ask an athlete, like, tell me how many grams of carbs you take per hour, they say, oh, I took a gel at 40 minutes, or I took a gel at 75 minutes, another gel. And by the time I finished my calculator, and I'm like, okay, so you took in 37 grams of carbs per hour, but you weigh 100 kilos. There's no way you got to triple that. So it's for me, it's like it's pure science or mathematics. You've got to understand what that volume of energy intake needs to be on an hourly basis, and you have to stick to it. You've got to make sure that, and clinical research has shown that the best absorption rates are those that are taken around the 30-minute mark. So if you've got a high volume of carb intake, you might want to split that 20, 40, 60. But if it's a nominal amount, you want to try and get that around that 30-minute mark feed and split it over there. So it's just important that you do that, because the energy system it's basically like a bit of a roller coaster. It's up and down as you're going through the motion. And if you're feeding too long in between the feeds, you're going to hit those troughs and you're not going to come out of them. And it's the same way with hydration. If you're not taking in enough fluid and you go through excessive fluid loss and you hit a trough, you're going to land up in a dehydrated state. And once you hit that area, there's no ways you're going backwards. And 30K is actually a crucial number in any marathon, because that's the point of, this is where you need those last legs to the finish. And if your energy system has been compromised and your hydration status has been compromised, by the time you hit 30, there's no ways you're going to land up, pushing those next 10 or 12 Ks in a really good way. It's just going to hurt you. And so you need to make sure that you're feeding very early on continuously to set yourself up for later on in the run.
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys. I am aware of the time, and it is, you both mentioned sleep in your presentation, so I'm aware that that's important. So last question each, please, if that's okay, and I'll make it a joint one, so that we all got runs tomorrow, I'm sure, so everyone must get to bed in time. So this is really just a comment from someone, but I'm going to turn it into a question. Bhavesh was just saying he's from Glenmarais. He's doing his first marathon at Jeppe. What would be, let's start with you. What would be your main advice for anyone who's doing their first marathon, whether it's, or first half even, whether it is at Jeppe or at Pretoria or any of the Balwin Sport races?
Anything, you really should try and soak up the experience. Okay, so I'm a firm believer that the first time you do anything is a learning experience, and that doesn't mean you mustn't set yourself a tough goal, but don't lose sight of what you're doing and what you're achieving. Particularly, again, we find it very easy to slide towards the marathon because we are a culture that wants to go further and further. But if this is your first 5K, if you signed up to the Balwin Sport Series because you want to get healthier, you want to spend more time with your kids, you want to be a little bit more outdoors, 10Ks, 21Ks, whatever that is. If it's the first time you're doing something, that is an achievement. So stay focused in that moment of the achievement, because you're not going to get another first time. Your first marathon, when it's done, it's done. And it's very easy for your first marathon. It's not as easy for your first 5K, but basically it's very easy for your first half and your first marathon, those two in particular, to be experiences that you'd rather forget. You never want to look back on your first marathon and go, so plan this race, have a goal, be a little bit conservative, be aware of your surroundings, make friends, soak up the atmosphere and interact with other people, and really just make it an experience to enjoy. And once you've learned a lot about how your body reacts in the marathon, once you've started to realize that, Mark was talking sense. I need to chow more when I do these things. Then you can start setting better goals, preparing yourself better, fixing the mistakes that you made for the first time around. But really make the first one about the experience. Enjoy yourself.
Yeah, I really, really, really love that, Linz. That's amazing. Mark, your advice for someone doing their first any 5, 10, 21 half marathon?
So I think what Lindsay said, trying to get to the finish with a smile on your face is always the goal, because otherwise you won't come back for another. So get it right. Okay, so I think from a nutrition perspective, you're going to get your friends and your running colleagues shoving everything that works for them down your face, and that's just going to confuse the hell out of you. You need to understand that sports nutrition, or the nutrition that you take on in your first race, it's very, very simple, and it doesn't have to be complicated. Simplicity is key. You can go with one product or 1.5 products or whatever it is, and you stick to it from the beginning to the end. And you've got to have confidence that a carb is a carb. You take it in and you stick to it, and the volume of carbohydrates will add up over time. And you've got to take something in that is, first of all, going to have the taste and the texture that you can tolerate for the entire run. You don't want to take in something that you want to spit out on every corner, or that it's disgusting. So if coffee is your flavor, or vanilla is your flavor, or you like orange or banana, whatever it is, stick to something that you enjoy, that's going to give you a good feeling when you consume it en route. And even if you like a peanut butter sandwich and there's someone standing there at halfway and they want to give it to you, that's okay as well. So on the nutrition side, just sit and work down on a piece of paper what you would like to take in and how much you would like to take in on an hourly basis, and stick to that on the day. Shut out all the noise around you that everybody's telling you what to do. Keep it simple. Make sure that you hydrate properly as well. And I always believe knowledge is power. There's a lot of webinars out there. There's a lot of information on the Coach Parry site. There's a lot of information on different sites that you can listen to different experts talking about marathon experiences and nutrition experiences. And, the more knowledge you have going into a run, the better prepared you are for it. And you do want to be as prepared as possible, but you want to be prepared from your own perspective, not from what everybody else is telling you, because you're going to have your own unique experience on the day, and that's really what it's going to come down to.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, absolutely love both of those comments there, guys. So yeah, thank you so much to both of you for your time, for your expertise. Really, really appreciate it. Always take some nuggets from these. I hope you at home watching this got a ton of value from this Balwin Sport Marathon Series webinar series. Thanks again to Laundromax for allowing that to happen, and of course to Balwin Sport for putting this whole series together. Hopefully see some of you out on the road at some of these races. So if you do see us, say hi. But yeah, really, really appreciate your time this evening. Get some good sleep, and happy running. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Good luck, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. Good luck.